The Nancy Guthrie investigation. What are the detectives doing every day? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Police Off the Cuff. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that many people watching the Nancy Guthrie case may not fully understand. What investigators are actually doing every single day on a major kidnapping investigation like this. From the outside, it may look like things have slowed down. But in reality, behind the scenes, detectives, technicians are working through a very specific daily investigative checklist. Today, we're going to break down the day-to-day investigative tasks, the digital evidence analysis, the ring camera and surveillance review, the canvassing and interviews, the forensic evidence results so far, and we'll explain why even negative results are important investigative developments. But a quick reminder, if you're looking for real crime insight, not YouTube theories, this channel's different. I'm a retired NYPD Sergeant, and on Police Off the Cuff, we analyze cases the way cops and prosecutors do. What matters, what doesn't, and what the internet gets wrong. If that's the perspective you want, subscribe now, because this isn't entertainment, this is experience. And we'd just like to remind you folks that the Police Off the Cuff podcast is sponsored by FanDuel on the Believe Network. So folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your thoughts, hold on to your prayers, hold on to your service dog. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the Off the Cuff zone, the Police Off the Cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
Joining me today, and I'm glad they're available this early during the day. What kind of lives do they have that they're available at 12:05 p.m.? Anyway, joining me is retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney at law. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Bill. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. And, of course, the yin to the yang, the Italian to the Irishman, we have straight out of Brooklyn, retired NYPD detective. Welcome to the show, Detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you for having me, Billy.
Good.
You're looking very spry today, Phil.
I'm trying.
Thought I'd give you a couple of good compliments so we get into the show. You know, many people, this show has gone through this case, the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping case, if it in fact is actually a kidnapping, has gone through so many permutations. What is it? Was it a burglary gone bad? Was it a kidnapping? Was it a straight out home invasion? And I don't think you can get 10 talking heads on a national basis to agree on what actually happened here. But while all the pundits, all the talking heads, all the broadcasters come up with new things to talk about every day, the investigators are out there wearing down their gumshoes. And that's an old expression, gumshoes, because they wore comfortable shoes so they can walk. But now most investigation is done over the phone and done electronically. So, Phil, you've worked major investigations like this. What are they doing every single day, Phil?
Well, they're following up leads, obviously, and they're looking into specific angles of this case. I mean, there's been a lot of different conspiracy theories that have been out there since the press conferences have ceased, and between the FBI and the investigators at hand not giving much information out, a lot of conjecture is taking place. And some of it we understand because we know that if the video is being released, that they're going to be focusing on that video. We're going to be talking about the backpack, the gloves, the mask, the holster of the gun. These things are being tracked down. And Bill, I'm glad you brought that point up about gumshoe detectives, because even though, yes, a lot of cases, the meat of the case is done through the internet, let's say through technology, through cell phone activity, through video camera technology. But there's still things that have to be tracked down. For instance, going to Walmart and looking through thousands and thousands of receipts to try and locate where these items could have been purchased. And there's other things. You get a tip, you have to follow it up. You have to make an appearance. Let's say someone says a person is involved in it. You have to go do interviews. You interview the person that reports it. Then you have to find out what information they have, follow that up. There is a technology part of it. There is a computer part of it, but there's also the part where you have to do face-to-face interviews. I think that it's a little bit taken back that nothing really meaty has happened in this case. What I mean by that is it seems like obviously there hasn't been an arrest. There's not much happening publicly. And I'm a little taken back by that because I feel that in a case that we have here where a woman is taken out of her home in the middle of the night, with all the cell phone technology that exists, the camera technology, the plate readers, all the different things, the traffic cameras, that we haven't had a break in the case as of yet. I'm a little taken back by that, but I do have faith that we are going to have a successful conclusion to this case.
You know, Mike, very well spoken, Phil. Mike, one of the things about investigation, and it takes time on both of these hands, you have that scale, right, of inclusion and elimination. And what do I mean by
Very
that? Well,
important.
you have to include things that turn out to have truth to it, turn out to have meat. And then things that are reported, perhaps tips that you find out there's no merit to this. This means nothing. You have to exclude it, but you have to use the same amount of time, the same amount of investigative resources to include as to exclude. You want to speak upon that, Mike?
Yeah, Bill, people don't realize, like in a case like this, when you have what is perceived to be a kidnapping in the beginning, and even after the beginning when we kind of wondering what it really was, because it didn't seem like a traditional kidnapping, everybody is a person of interest. I'm not going to call them a suspect. I'll use that word that sometimes we hate, person of interest. Every member of that family is a person of interest until the police could figure out, get their story, see if they've got any sort of person who could vouch for where they were, any sort of information like that. Then you start working outwards. You start looking at other family members, in-laws. You're looking at people who've come onto that property, people who know her, people that maybe, did she ever receive a threatening letter or an email? Did she have problems in her church? Anybody acting suspicious in the neighborhood? Teenagers, their robbery pattern, burglary pattern in the area. You start to go from the center and move outward. And all this stuff, you've got to get statements from people, like Phil said, and then you got to go and see and check it out. That takes very long time to do all of that, because you're getting all these stories, and it's a story until you can either include somebody as, okay, they're still a person of interest, or you can exclude somebody, say, okay, they were a person of interest and now they are no longer. Okay, you start eliminating people very slowly. But in this kind of case, the public doesn't see it, because now it's being done behind the scenes. The police aren't in that house. They don't have the crime scene tape up. They don't have federal officers and prosecutors going in and out. Therefore, it's all being done someplace else. The public loses a little bit of trust in the police, or maybe a little bit of confidence in the police. You're not getting the nightly information from a reporter standing like right in front of the home. But it is, as Phil said, this is the time where all of the information that you've gathered, you've got to check it out. It's time consuming. It's slow. It's a slow slog. It's nothing that's sexy for the public to see or gets anybody excited. But this is where they're at. And this is the hard part. They will get someone in the end, but it may be quite a while.
Absolutely. At Lisa Gita 9511 from the chat, they've interviewed a few people and it's truly impacted those people's lives, not in a good way. I know it's considered collateral damage, but it's destroying some of their lives. I think they'll get over it. And obviously, it's never a comfortable thing to be interviewed by the police, especially if they're pointing fingers at you.
Think how devastating it is to the family of Nancy Guthrie. Think about what they're going through. So if some people get upset by being questioned about the police, probably with good reason, and they're not going to send a Christmas card to the local police, I'll live with that. We have a much more important set of circumstances that we need to find out what happened to Nancy Guthrie and who's responsible. So unfortunately, sometimes when you make an omelet, you have to crack a few eggs, as they say.
Absolutely. From the chat at Simi Sharp, one of our moderators, tips 1-800-CALL-FBI or FBI.gov/tips. Thank you, Simi, for that information. So what do detectives do every single day when the investigation has hit this level, right? Well, there's a tip intake review. Every day they're getting hundreds of tips, right? Every morning, investigators, they get new public tips, anonymous tips, online tips, Crime Stopper submissions, tips generated from the $1 million reward. And then tips are prioritized based on credibility, corroboration, proximity to the crime scene, right? Knowledge only the offender would know. Even tips that seem minor are logged and tracked. And then there's an evidence review meeting. These are so important because folks don't realize policing, well, maybe you do realize it, but policing is a 24/7, 365 business, right? And it is a business, but it is much more than that. So they must cover 24/7, 365. And an investigation like this, I would imagine there's 2 shifts. There's probably, 8 in the morning to 8 at night, 8 at night to 8 in the morning, and that's how many hours these investigators are working, and probably 5 to 6 days a week, and they don't get much of a break. But that's what the importance of this, and to keep pounding the pavement. And there's a sort of a rule of thumb that when you hit a brick wall, and if that's even the case in this investigation, in an investigation, homicide, a kidnapping, any major investigation, you start over. You start over. You read the case over. You go over everything. And that's why the leadership in these investigations are so important, because someone has to lead this investigation, whether it be the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Office or the conjunction of both of them. There has to be a leader. And you have to, believe me, detectives want direction, right? And you can't leave it up to just the detectives because they're not the bosses. And I know we say bosses funny in New York. They're not the bosses. There are police bosses that determine the direction of this investigation with the help of the detectives and the investigators. So all of those things are quite important. The direction, where are they going? And so, some of the leads, the new leads they get, some of them, they're not really that credible. Yesterday we spoke about who disabled the Wi-Fi. You see the thumbnail up on the screen. And that was because I think one person indicated that lived near Nancy Guthrie that she or they had an interruption in their Wi-Fi signal at around the time Nancy Guthrie went missing. Now, is that in fact verified? And then they showed an up-close picture of the alleged perpetrator having what they thought may have been a device with an antenna in his right pocket, right front pants pocket. That could be either like a coincidence, or he is carrying something in his pocket and we're interpreting that's what it was, or it could really be that was a blocking device of the Wi-Fi. But either way, they have to investigate that. And remember, we talked about inclusion and exclusion. That's what they have to do. Phil, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that inclusion and exclusion of specific elements of a case is so important, because a lot of times in the early stages, let's say we'll get a tip on something, we'll check it out, and we say, no, this has got nothing to do with the case. We exclude it. But perhaps weeks later or even days later, it comes up again and we can say, no, we go back to the case folder, we look at the DD5s, which are the follow-up reports, and we say, no, we already looked at that. That's not part of this investigation. But there's a lot of other things that are missing from this case. Right now, it seems like there's a brick wall, and I don't want to call it that. I want to say things slowed down a bit. And in cases where, major cases like this, where things sort of slow down, that's the time, and Billy, you pointed it out, where you have to reevaluate. Let's sit down. Let's go over the case again. Let's do some recanvass, re-interview. And I can remember a case where 6 months down the line, it was a homicide. I had gone on Crime Stoppers on television with the case. It had slowed down. Sure enough, a detective picks up the case folder, decides to do an interview of a person that was interviewed within hours of the case starting when the body was found. that person winds up pulling them into the apartment and giving up the perpetrator to the case. So things like that are probably being done right now. Let's double canvas. Let's recanvas that location. Perhaps there's locations that they went to the house, knocked on the door, no one was home. We're going to go back there and try and find those people. Or perhaps, yes, someone was home, but the person that we want to talk to was away. Let's do all of those things. Let's relook at some of the evidence. Even though the DNA evidence hasn't been productive to give us a perpetrator, we still have the possibility, and the possibility exists and remains, that that person's DNA wasn't in CODIS and that person's DNA is in any of the genealogical sites. So that DNA evidence, even though it wasn't fruitful, it still down the line could be. If we zero in on somebody and we can get a DNA sample and match it, perhaps that could be something very powerful. There's a lot of things. Those vehicles that were caught on those 12 vehicles that were caught on the video, I think that's going to be a very important point. I talked about that in a previous podcast. And I think that, yes, there's the vehicle right there, which I am certain that investigators are tracking down and trying to recover who those vehicles were and talk to those people. So all things of that nature. And I know that the sheriff made a remark about thousands and thousands of those vehicles. I think they'll be able to narrow it down a little bit quicker than what he's talking about. And I'm sure that those detectives are working very hard. And you're 100% correct, Billy. I would think that there's probably at least 2 or 3 shifts working this thing 24 hours a day. Because if in the middle of the night, someone decides to, you know what, this is related to that case, and they make that call, detectives want to be at the ready to jump out and perhaps maybe come up with some good information that'll lead to the successful conclusion of this case.
Absolutely. At Sharon Chuvala 8633, what y'all's, I like that y'all's, we don't say that in New York. Like, what are y'all's theories as to why Nanos turned down the help from professional search parties? I think he's inexperienced. I think he's misguided. I don't think he should be the one running this investigation. And we have had personal contact with Texas Equus, an outstanding investigation that regularly across this country finds missing people. And then I can't really speak with my personal experience with the Cajun Navy, but they have a tremendous reputation too. Why would you turn that down? Because they potentially could be looking for a body. Who's better at that than they are? They are the best at it. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, it would seem like we've talked about this before. Why would you turn down help? Volunteer help from a total newbie? Okay, maybe not. But if you could organize a group of people and closely supervise them, maybe they could do something. And that's for the newbies, the volunteers. But somebody like the Cajun Navy or Equus, they have a proven track record. Why wouldn't you bring them in? Hear what they have to say, look at whatever equipment they have, think about like what do they think about the case, looking, because they do have some experience, obviously. Why you wouldn't say, let's take a look at this. What could you do for me in this specific case? What is your experience? You're in the Navy. We're talking about diving. We don't think we're going to be using diving equipment here. We're in the desert, but what experience do you have? And, try it. What do you got to lose? I think the only thing he's got to lose is face, the concept of face. He's a politician. And I think he doesn't want to look. I think he believes he will be perceived as grasping at straws if he takes, this help from Equus or the Cajun Navy. But I think in reality, most people will be like, go for it. Go for it and do it. I think it's political because that sheriff's job as head sheriff in that county, that's an elected position, and he's looking at re-election. And I think he's afraid of losing face.
Sharon Chuvala 8633. Let me put you back on the. They're free of charge. Yes, one of the addendums to that, though, Sharon, is that they have to be requested by the sheriff's office. They will not show up, and they've learned that from experience, unless their services are requested. So perhaps because they're not part of the Pima County Sheriff's Office, perhaps Sheriff Nanos is being territorial and not bringing them on, or for that fact, the Cajun Navy, because he surely could use the help in that vein at this point. Phil.
Besides being free of charge, they are trained not to disturb a crime scene. God forbid they go into the woods with just everyday citizens, civilians, and they could perhaps contaminate a piece of evidence or contaminate a crime scene. So that's why if you're going to do a search, why not request professionals that have done this stuff before and have recovered evidence and not contaminated it? I think it was a silly move. And in the beginning, I think there was searches where they enlisted the help of locals and civilians who don't have any experience in that background. So with something like that, I know that he got territorial. It seems like he didn't want the FBI's help. Talking about Sheriff Nanos in the early stages, the first couple of days, he didn't enlist the help of the FBI. And why wouldn't you want to use all the tools in your toolbox to recover an 84-year-old woman that's now missing? And, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me. If you're going to do a search, I would definitely enlist the help of professional search agencies that will not perhaps contaminate a piece of evidence or disturb a possible crime scene.
That's 100% correct, Phil. Folks, we're Police Off the Cuff. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Give us the like. Share us with your friends and family. Make lots of comments. It helps our algorithm grow. And if you want to contribute to us financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership, and you can become part of the Police Off the Cuff YouTube family just by joining that site, and you can help this show grow as we would like to. This is from News Nation. They're talking about a possible web outage when the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping was occurring.
Isna, an AI-driven 3D search and analytics company. 2019, he was one of Forbes magazine's 30 under 30. Show off, but great to have you here nonetheless. All right, Brian, I want to start with you. Okay, it seems investigators are taking this theory pretty seriously, but can you provide more clarity on it? Like how widespread it was, how long this would have lasted, you know, this jammer situation? Was it just one night? I mean, what do we know about it?
So we know this started because we found out that the FBI agents were asking the neighbors if they experienced an internet disruption or outage right around the time that Nancy Guthrie went missing, which was around 2 a.m. on February 1st. Come to find out, one of the neighbors who lives behind Nancy Guthrie tells me that he realized that the 2 Ring cameras on the back of his house, so the part that are actually closest to Nancy Guthrie's house, became inactive during that time period, which has never happened before. And he's, of course, reported that now to the FBI. Also interesting, Jesse, one of his dogs actually woke up at that same time, which he says is very unusual in the middle of the night, and wanted to go outside and then was staring in the direction of Nancy Guthrie's house.
So let me ask about this, Paul. Based on what we're seeing here, I'm going to leave the floor to you. You saw the video, the picture where it might appear that this suspect has a jammer in the back pocket. You heard the description laid out by Brian. Is this all consistent with somebody purchasing and using some sort of jamming signal device? What would it do? Does it seem consistent?
It does, considering the proximity. So these Wi-Fi jammers typically have a range of between like 30 to 100 feet. And so the investigator...
You know, I just want to say something here. If this person that we see in the video, this criminal, was that sophisticated to use a Wi-Fi jammer, why was he picking up weeds to cover up the camera? It's not consistent with his behavior. Is that really a Wi-Fi jammer in his pocket, or was there? They're also now coming up with there was a junction box or something that was tampered with in the neighborhood. Of course, they're going to check that out. What they want to determine with that was what was the level of it being tampered with. And when was it tampered with? What was the time frame of when it was tampered with? Could it have been just a regular service call or something and they didn't get back to it to fix it? I don't know. These are questions we all have. But that question I have of like, this guy's using weeds to cover the camera, but yet he's sophisticated enough to use this jamming device, Phil.
Sounds a little bit James Bondish to me, but anything is possible. It could be a walkie-talkie, could be a cell phone, could be any number of things in his pocket. based on what you just said, Billy, you laid out a pretty good scenario to me to say, I'm not going to put a lot of weight into the fact that this guy was carrying a jammer. If he's got the jammer and he turns it on, why is he so concerned with that Ring doorbell camera, which eventually is removed from the location too? First, he's trying to put some type of a block on it, with the weeds, and then the camera is removed. So if he was so certain with this jammer, why would he then do those things? So I agree with you, Billy. I'm not putting a lot of weight into it. And based on what we see in that video, that seems pretty sophisticated to me to have this type of a jammer. In my opinion, of that person in that video doesn't appear to be that sophisticated. However, anything is possible. It's quite possible. And the fact that we have that person that lives behind Nancy Guthrie and their cameras seem to have gone out, I mean, is it a coincidence or is it related? Brian Enton talked about there. It doesn't seem like the range of a jammer is going to be that great of a distance. So anything is possible at this point. And with regard to that junction box that you're talking about, or that box that may have been tampered with, there should be some type of a chronological data that shows when it was tampered with. If something goes out, let's say your cable gets cut, or some type of a storm with phone or electricity, there's usually a record in the computers of whoever owns that junction box. They'd be able to tell a time frame. So again, the gumshoe work is being done on stuff like that.
At -6339 from the chat, why not a satellite search looking for fresh soil, drones, dogs? The Cajun folks have drones and dogs, and so does Texas Equus, Midwest Equus. They can discover from above whether the ground has been disturbed. And obviously, if Nancy Guthrie is no longer among us, if they had to get rid of her remains, they would most likely dig it out in the desert. And these people are experts on these type of searches, Mike.
Yeah, that's why it seems foolish to us to would take very experienced people with credible, records of actually finding people and not giving them a chance to work with you. I think it's a political move from the sheriff's point of view. He's afraid of their success because might come at the expense of his perceived leadership. But this is, and I'm hoping that they have already used drones looking and dogs. I'm hoping they've done it. If they haven't done it by now, I'd say, what are you waiting for? This is the kind of thing where if you've got like a bloodhound or a basset hound and you've got them out in the woods, use it, use them. What are you waiting for at this point? But there is a vast area where there's a possibility of that person a body being disposed of. They have to worry about access trails where there may be camera trails for the public on a state park or something like that. But there's tremendous areas where they could hide a body there. And even if they have actually already begun looking with dogs and drones, the area may be so vast that it's going to take a long time. I'm hoping they've done that already, or they've been doing it, but you can never be too sure with the way this case is going. Everything seems to be a little off.
Yeah, absolutely. This is from local news station 4.
36 in the search for Nancy Guthrie. The 84-year-old mother of Today Show co-host Savannah Guthrie was reported missing 5 weeks ago today. And today, the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed to News 4 Tucson that they are aware of a damaged utility box near Nancy's home, a little more than a half a mile away. A PCSD spokesperson tells us tonight it is being reviewed as part of the investigation. Detectives are still searching for the suspect in that video that we have shown you lots of times over the last few weeks. That is that man in the ski mask and gloves, appearing to carry a gun at his waist and wearing that Ozark Trail hiker pack. Investigators still reviewing home surveillance video from the night Nancy was abducted. Investigators now asking neighbors if they had issues with their internet the night of January 31st into the morning of February 1st. Detectives may be looking into whether the suspect used a high-tech device known as a Wi-Fi jammer to scramble security cameras. Now, if you have any information that can help detectives here in this case, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. There is currently a combined reward of $1.2 million for for any information that leads to Nancy's recovery. And as we continue to cover the search for Nancy Guthrie, be sure to stay with News 4 Tucson on air, online, and on our social.
So there you have it. The junction box, the jammer. Someone in the chat said, I thought jammers were illegal. So is murder and so is kidnapping.
Yeah, right.
But
Exactly.
somehow people are able to obtain them for whatever nefarious uses they may have for them.
I would tend to think a device like that is probably very expensive, Billy. It's probably available throughout the web or the dark web, but I would think something like that would be quite expensive. And do we think that a perpetrator that's going to pull this off would go for that kind of a cost to pull off this crime? You know, when you talk about professionals, maybe you'd say yes, but this guy doesn't look what we call as a professional to me.
You know, that term always makes me laugh a little bit, Phil.
Yeah.
You know, I've never really met I've met criminals that do crime as a profession, but as far as having a high level of professionalism, I never met one that did have a high degree of professionalism. I see you laughing, Mike.
Yeah, I remember my partner Augie and I locked up a guy who'd been arrested like 11 times for burglary. And I'm just like, you know, dude, you got to come up with a better line of work because you suck at this, you know. And so I always think about that perp, you know.
Yeah. Well, I dealt with guys that were arrested for robbery. I was in the robbery squad for about 2 years and, you know, 30, 32, 34, 35 robberies. And, you know, they're getting let out, obviously drug habits, and same thing with burglaries. And you're right, Mike, people like that, you want to try and say to them, guy, you know, get with the program. Even domestic violence. I had domestic violence cases where we locked up the same person over and over again for violating orders of protection and stuff. So, yeah, I guess, you know, you see a lot of these so-called professionals in movies and on television, but in real life, you don't get to meet very many of these professional criminals, as we'll say.
At Ange.4542, are signal jammers illegal to own or use? I'm sure they are. I'm sure there's no practical use for them. What would the practical use be for a jammer? You know, it's funny.
Military, that's about it. It's the only thing that comes to my mind, the military or law enforcement.
Every time I say that word jammer, I think of jammy, and that's what a lot of NYPD cops refer to as guns. Yeah, he had a jammy on him, you know, and there's all kinds of lingo for
tool. He had a tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, remember the Rastas used to call it a puppy?
Oh, yeah.
Puppy man. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's all different lingo for this. And here we have a jammer, which is being used to block a Wi-Fi signal. This is the Today Show.
We turn now to the latest on the search for Nancy Guthrie, now entering day 37. Pima County Sheriff's Department officials confirming they are now investigating a damaged utility box around the corner from Guthrie's home. Investigators say the equipment could be connected to a reported internet outage in the area around the time she disappeared. The outage may have disrupted nearby surveillance systems, potentially affecting video evidence. A reminder, if you have any information that could be helpful, we urge you to call that tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI.
Hey, so they're using words like could and may. So easy to check that out, right? You go send a repair crew. What time did this go offline? How long has this been offline? Is it consistent with the time that Nancy Guthrie was reported kidnapping? None of it matches. Closed lead. End of lead.
I would think that this was probably something that was done within the first couple of days. The minute you start knocking on doors and asking people about their video systems and they say, well, it was out at that point, that's something that I think would come to the surface very early on in this investigation. Perhaps this is something that someone reported to a reporter. Yeah, my internet was out. It may have already been done. We may know the answer to that. It could have been previous to the Nancy Guthrie case, or it could have been post, could have been after. But I think that it doesn't seem like something that's new to me. New to the media, yes, but I would think that would be something that, you know, there was an extensive FBI investigators, local. I think that would have been coming to the surface quite quickly.
You know, we had we covered the profilers, Mary Ellen O'Toole, Jim Clementi, right? And the fourth was the doctor, Joseph Scott Morgan.
Yeah.
And they all had different takes on this, similar but different, right? And I was a little surprised at Joseph Scott Morgan, who mentioned what we hadn't heard of. He mentioned elder abuse. And that was one of the first times that was brought up by any talking head. And Joseph Scott Morgan, I have tremendous respect for the man. He's Dr. Joseph Scott Morgan. He's worked in the homicide and missing person business. And one of the interesting things he said that raised a lot of eyebrows was, do you know how many cases I've had with a ransom in my entire career? Do you know how many? And everyone is getting ready for this big number. And he said, 0, none. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Dr. Scott Morgan is fantastic. And he talked about elder abuse. And, we didn't think of that at the time. And I never heard anybody mention it. You're right. But we always were like, okay, this was in the beginning, strictly a kidnapping. She's the mom of a celebrity. She's going to be rich. So they must know it. It's an organized little group of people doing this. Oh, they got the ransom note that came through Harvey at TMZ.
Harvey Levin.
Okay, this is kind of interesting. And then it kind of falls apart. And we're thinking, okay, was this a burglary? Was this a home invasion? But, as he said with the elder abuse, it might have been like a home invasion, because they knew that even if they didn't know who she was as a celebrity's mom, they saw her maybe as just an elderly lady that they could abuse and terrorize. And so maybe that's what he was looking at, saying, look, there are times where people are targeted only for what they are, not for what they possess or what money they may have, but they're just an old lady or an old man. They want to terrorize this old lady, and maybe the abuse went overboard, and they took her out. And that he talked about the expiration of the blood. It looked like a cough from when you look at the blood droplet patterns. And so he went to that. He went to kind of to that area idea. I think that's something that you would have to then say, who in this area, who in the state of Arizona is on parole, got out of prison early, previously, any time in the past 6 months or a year, who's had a record of, horribly abusing elderly people. And I think that's a valid avenue to go down.
You're right, Mike. So people in the chat, they keep asking, does either the Cajun Navy or Texas Equus, Midwest Equus need to be asked? Yes, they do. We just
they can't just come in.
The local jurisdiction, in this case, the Pima County Sheriff's Office, must request their assistance. Without that, first of all, they would never show up, because it's a great cost to show up at a location with their personnel, with their equipment, and do these type of searches. And they are financed by donations. So they're not going to just show up and say, hey, here we are, we're going to search. No, you're not. We didn't ask for you. We didn't give you permission. Phil.
Yeah, absolutely, Billy. And we know from previous cases that they were involved in, it's exactly what you said. They need to be asked, and they're all ready, willing, and able to help. It's an all volunteer group. It's funded by, like you said, donations. And if in fact they are asked, they would get there, they would do what they have to do. It's fully funded by the donations, and they would conduct a search. And we know that they're trained not to disturb the crime scene. I think that that's a very important point, because if you have just John Q. citizen out there doing a search, trying to help, which is a very noble thing. And I love to see community involvement in any type of a criminal case where there's help needed from the public. That's something that we encourage. But we also have the possibility, if someone stumbles upon a piece of evidence, like picking it up or moving it, it could definitely contaminate the evidence. So that point, I think we've made that pretty clear. But I just want to point something out from the chat. Shania134, this is a chat, a comment she made a little while ago. Such a strong case, in my opinion. Why do you think she was taken? Such a strange case. What, in my opinion, why do you think she was taken? Seems not for a ransom. So even someone that is in the chat and just everyday people feel the same way as we do. We don't think this was a ransom. We think that this was possibly a home invasion. She was targeted, and maybe, like Mike just pointed out, things get out of hand. She becomes injured, and they decide, which is an unusual thing, to remove her from the location. And I have a case that I referenced earlier where 6 months down the line, we got the information, we made the arrest. But in that particular case, it was a 79-year-old woman that was targeted because there was rumor in her apartment building that she had her husband had died and she had collected $100,000 in life insurance and it was in her washing machine. Totally untrue, but a local crackhead that heard that rumor decided to rob her and went into the location, forced his way in, and did some things to her to try and get the information. Where's the money? Where's the money? And we knew from the evidence that was exactly what happened. And unfortunately, she was also killed. So we don't know what the exact motive for this case was. Was she targeted because she was Savannah Guthrie's mom, or was she just targeted because of the elder abuse, or she's an older person living in a nice neighborhood and perhaps the perpetrators thought that it was going to be a pot of gold inside of that home? Those are the questions that I think need to be answered to come to a successful conclusion to this case.
You know, the most baffling thing to me in this case is the three things we've discussed sort of ad nauseum. Was it a kidnapping? Was it a burglary gone bad? Or was it a straight out home invasion? And when we say a home invasion, burglary are very similar, except home invaders have decided they're going in violently and they're going to go in with guns, as you saw. So all the experts, and I don't say that word mildly, there are a lot of experts that have weighed in on this case. They're running out of ideas too. And some of them are changing up their original theories on this. And we saw three different profilers, three well-respected profilers. In fact, Jim Clemente, who writes for the TV show, he's the head writer for Criminal Minds, but he's also retired FBI agent, a former prosecutor. All these FBI agents bang out a law degree in their spare time, just like Professor Mike Geary here. I wish I had the smarts to do that. They all bang out these law degrees. Jim Clemente is one of them. Jim Clemente did a profile on the Gilgo Beach serial killer 12 years before he was caught. It was exact. It was Rex Heuermann. It described him exactly. And it was, if you want to read it, you can pull it up in the New York Times. Just put Jim Clemente profiles Gilgo Beach serial killer. 12 years before he was caught. He weighed in on this case. And he was speaking to Brian Enton. And he had some interesting, of course, he felt that the criminal, the perpetrator who we see on video here, wasn't the smartest bulb in the electrical socket, But guess what? It's 37, 38 days, and he hasn't been caught yet. So is intelligence going to get him caught or lack thereof, Mike?
Yeah, Bill, you got to figure there had to be someone else involved in this. And I believe there's at least two. And so maybe more, but maybe two. So it's not a secret. There's the ability that the $1 million is going to tempt somebody to talk. But this was organized. It may not be the most highly bright person. He may not be the Einstein, but he and someone else were organized enough to pull this off. And as right now, they're frustrating the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff. And so they got some smarts. They're smart and stupid at the same time. The idea that he's, got a piece of weed and he's trying to block a ring camera, and he's looking at the ring camera with, straight on with a little flashlight in his mouth. And he's like, you just wonder, where did this guy come from? But, there's a ways to go here. And as Phil said, they're checking everything else out. And in the end, it's probably not going to be the most sophisticated, idea. It may have be that they're just people who know her and maybe somehow involved in her life peripherally. But at this point, they have done enough things right to have gotten away with it for this long. We believe that right now they may be, working towards a more coherent and, idea of what happened, getting a much better idea of what actually went on, narrowing down the list of possible suspects. But this case has taken way too many twists and turns. It will be solved, but it's going to be a while.
At Daryl 7777, Sergeant Bill, why do you guys think that the FBI hasn't released a colorized video of the suspect at the door? Were they unable to colorize it? Daryl, I'm going to let Phil answer that, but first I just want to make a comment. And this is baffling to me, and what you just said is baffling to you. Why hasn't the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Office made a sketch of the perpetrator based on what they have on the video, much like this one that was made from a retired Houston police sketch artist? That is baffling to me. I do not have the answer to that. Phil, I don't know if you have the answer to why hasn't the FBI made a colorized version of the videotape or still photos of the perpetrator here. I can't answer the one about the sketch. Perhaps you can answer this one.
Billy, I've been calling for that from minute one. The minute that video was released, that was one of the things that we all said they need to colorize it, because once it's colorized, I think it's going to be a lot more familiar to somebody that knows that subject. It's very difficult with the blacks and the grays and the whites to look at that and say, well, the jacket is this color or that color. They colorized the movie The Wizard of Oz from what was done in the 1930s. Why can't they colorize this video? I am certain that the technology exists to do that. Why haven't they done it? I don't know the answer to that. With regard to the sketch, we know that they can take the bone structure of the face from the masked individual and perhaps come up with some type of a sketch. Doesn't have to be the exact likeness of the person. As we know, all sketches are similar. That's what we're looking for, a similar. We know that there could be some facial hair. So I think they could put together a better sketch. That person put together a sketch. Now, that sketch, it looks like possibly the same age category as what we're thinking as far as that perpetrator goes. But we don't know for sure. I think that the technology definitely exists. And listen, there's a lot of things that could be done, and perhaps there's reasons they're not being done. I don't know. But I think that $1.2 million reward that we talked about from the beginning, we were talking about it very early on. There needs to be a large reward. Colorized sketched, $1.2 million reward. Colorized video, and then a sketch, and then the reward. I think that would have a definite impact on this case.
I think that first of all, the video and the stills made from the video has been analyzed, reanalyzed again by the FBI. In fact, they were talking about doing what's called an iris scan, where they can actually take a picture of the eyes and pull up the iris and see if there's any way they could identify. Look, they have incredible facial recognition technology these days. And if anyone has the state of the art facial recognition technology, it's the FBI. There's been a lot of controversy in regards to using that. I don't know why. There's a lot of knuckleheads in our country that see everything in the vein of race. And some of them don't want to use that amazing tool called facial recognition. And some of the other tools, there's even those that don't want to use ShotSpotter and the latest technology we have. So I think if anyone has the technology and has the resources to take that face and identify the person through facial recognition and other digital and bio type of databases, it's the FBI. Mike.
Yeah, they got, as you say, they got all the resources, and the FBI, I believe, is probably in this case, they may be working with the federal authorities. This may be, if they do catch the person, and I believe they will, this may be a federal case. If there's any sort of indication that Ms. Guthrie has been moved across state lines. But yeah, they have all that ability. It is perplexing why you wouldn't use it. Same idea with the Cajun Navy and Equus. Why wouldn't Pima County use it? You've got the tools available. It's not like technology that they haven't invented yet. No, this is not, they can do this. They can definitely do this. And so why they're not, that's perplexing. Hopefully when there is an arrest, and I believe there'll be some sort of sit down afterwards. And there can be some very candid discussions between the press and the law enforcement officials in this case to say why were things done the way they were. And it seems kind of like self-evident that you would use these things. It doesn't make any sense.
Oh, at ME53, that sketch by the 76-year-old artist also said she did her best, but she wasn't 100% certain she got it right. Emmy, no sketch artist is 100% certain that they got it right. It's a sketch. Right. It's not a total accurate rendition. They're using information. Well, in this case, they're using information from a video, and they have the dimensions. They have how close the eyes are to each other. Where is the nose located on the face? And of course, the mask disguises some of this thing, but there's no sketch in the history of police work that is exact. It's absolutely ridiculous to think that. But there's still, having said that, there still should be a sketch. This is from Court TV.
From 3 different instances, you see it there. The cactus are kind of in the way, but you can kind of see it. Lighter colored car, looks to be some kind of crossover SUV. This could be an interesting development as this investigation continues.
Really interesting. This is the kind of stuff you expect like early on in the case. All right, thanks so much, Cody, sticking around the whole hour. That brings us to the first question in our investigation. Is Nancy Guthrie in one of those cars? One of those cars caught on camera 2.5 miles from Nancy's house in those early morning hours. Joining me to help answer that question, retired police commander, host of Apple Podcast's #1 news show, Gardens of Evil, Inside the Zion Society Cult. Mike King is here. Also with us, private investigator, safety and security expert, author of Prepared, Not Scared, Bill Stanton. All right, great to have you, Mike. Congratulations. Amazing work as always.
Thanks, Vinny.
And we know that money is going to help others in that big project you're doing. So that's another important part of it. So please support it, folks. All right, Mike, is it possible Nancy Guthrie is in one of those cars and is caught on that Ring camera?
Yeah, absolutely, it's possible, Vinny. I think the thing that I'm starting to think about now is I started looking at the roads and network, the street network from that location. If we take the video that Cody just provided from Fox, it shows 2 vehicles that, if I'm understanding the location of that home, and I think I've got it dialed in, those 2 vehicles would have been heading northbound, or could essentially be saying they're heading toward Nancy's house, because this road system that we're showing and that we've shown in that little clip you had really only gives you one way up in there if you're going up this street. Now, there's a couple little side streets, but that leaves 1 vehicle at 236 heading southbound or past that location. And this is what really got me intrigued. And so I started putting all of this onto a map today, video, and I started thinking about the actual course of travel. So here we're seeing that vehicle heading southbound in that 3rd vehicle that we're looking at. So the question becomes, why this area? Because really, there's no reason to be traveling into this area unless you're going to a destination, because you can see the road network just doesn't let you go any other way. Now, it does go past where that glove was found weeks earlier. But if they were heading south, they'd take a much more direct route. If they were going east, a much more direct route north and west. So we see this thing really starting to dial in. And from my perspective, as one who always looks at geography as part of crime and the behaviors, is why this location, why this spot, if that thing is somehow...
I'm glad that he said that, because we've said very early on here, there's something called geographical crime analysis. And that is really just the theory that criminals commit crimes in areas close to where they live. So he's talking about that very thing. He always looks at geography in regards to who and where the crime was committed. Very interesting, right? So we bring this up. There's 12 cars. And the one that they pulled out earlier that they analyzed and said, this was only 6 minutes from, or it could, excuse me, I believe it was 8 minutes from Nancy Guthrie's house. And they were looking at this car as the potential vehicle. Could Nancy Guthrie have been inside that car? Yes, the answer is yes. But could she have been in any one of those other 11 cars involved in this? And the answer is yes also. So now, Phil, how do we, and we spoke about this before, how do we include and exclude?
Well, we're going to try and track down the owners of those said vehicles and try and interview them to see, like you said, either include or exclude. But how else do we shake the tree in this case? I say we go to the counties and we look for parolees, recent parolees. Criminals usually work within a network, and let's find out, interview them. When you have a person that's on parole, you can go into their home, you can do a search. They don't have any civil rights while they're on parole. So you can go into that location, search. Perhaps you find some narcotics paraphernalia that they're not supposed to be using while they're on parole. So now you have leverage against them. Give me information. What do you know about this case? And I would start with the county that Nancy Guthrie lives in, and I would go to the neighboring counties. When we had an organized crime case, let's say an organized crime murder, when I worked in Brooklyn, what would we do to shake the tree? We would go to the social clubs and break chops, break balls at those social clubs, whether it be search warrants, whether it would be just outside and have uniform, write some parking tickets out there. We would want to gather information by using pressure. That's what they have to do in this case. They have to shake the tree, go to the parolees, go into their homes, do searches, do interviews, and even people that have been arrested recently can be debriefed. All of those things I'm certain of being done. That's how you shake the tree in a case like this. Regarding those vehicles, they definitely have the work cut out for them. They have to try and identify the vehicles, the specific vehicles, then try to do some interviews. And there's other cameras in the area that they can match up to. If the car is going into a specific destination or a location, and you know it's going north, south, east, west, you try to piggyback the cameras. Perhaps even you get a plate number if you get lucky. So all of those things I'm certain of being done.
From the chat at Ann.4542, Sergeant, couldn't FBI at least compare unknown DNA to profiles on SATG arrestees in nearby communities, states? Well, you know, if they're on parole or if they're under the supervision of the criminal justice system, yeah, they could do that. They could compare it. But I don't see exactly, are you talking about unknown or unidentified DNA in regards to this case, or forensic DNA that's in CODIS that may or may not be from this area? Mike, your thoughts? You're the attorney.
Well, yeah, we know that the all the DNA that they got inside the house that was viable, and they connected to people who were family members or other people who had access to that house, and they were probably already debriefed. Where was that DNA found? In her bedroom, in her kitchen? Was it found in the garage, where you'd see a plumber or a worker, say in her basement? That's all been done. They've all done that. There was one bit of evidence, one bit of DNA that was muddled. It was maybe degraded. It could combine several people, and they didn't get a hit in CODIS. And so therefore, they're looking at investigative genetic genealogy. Maybe someone who is related to the person who left that DNA uploaded their own DNA into one of those ancestry websites. But it's going to take quite a long time. And I think they even said maybe up to a year to figure it out. But that's where we're at. All of that DNA that they found, that we've been told that they found, was connected to a living person, and their alibis matched up.
Absolutely. From the chat at Denise Damron 5752. Okay, 2 questions. Why didn't they take the doormat? And 2, is it possible the car with front end damage towed from Luke's is related to the damaged utility box around the corner from Nancy's? Yes. Oh, well, let me get the first question. Why didn't they take the doormat? God knows. I have no idea. That is poor crime scene management if they left it there.
Puzzling, very puzzling.
I don't know. I can't really give a good reason for that. And as far as the car with the front end damage, you could compare the paint from the car on the box and see, and again, eliminate or include, right? And that's how you could do that. Thank you very much, Denise, for your question. I just seen Elizabeth Wilson-J7P. I just seen reports of a body found in the area. Is it connected? No, they've excluded that. The body was not the body, of course, that they would have been looking for. Emmy, at Emmy 53, many have blamed 4 individuals just based on the mask and rumors they heard about inheritance, POA, and in all comparisons. It's at least 4 different individuals. It can't be all 4. Is possible neither. Well, Emmy, all of the eventualities, and that's a big question. There's a lot to say to answer that. But all of those things, again, would be included or excluded through investigators by talking to people and using evidence to include or exclude. At Fat Rat 88, Derek Colella needs to be followed up on. What's his alibi? Don't know. I'm not sure who that is. The body found in Phoenix was not related to this case. Let me quickly go back to Court TV. This was quite interesting.
Now, tied to this case, I think it kind of reduces the probability that it's tied unless they happen to have suspects who live in that area where we've got Y here on the map.
All right, Bill, what are your thoughts? Could Nancy Guthrie be in one of those cars that's caught on camera?
Well, before I give you my answer, my first thought would be, how do we compare apples to apples? Has that camera picked up cars with such frequency in the past at that time? Do cars normally go by at 2:30 in the morning? And what's the frequency? Now I'll tell you, I think it's probable because we see the car coming in at 12 and change. It lines up with both times. I do believe it's that car, and I do think it's with more than one person.
Explain that. When you say more than one person, why, Bill?
Well, let's look at it both ways. You're dealing with an elderly person, right? You're shaking them awake more than likely. Or if the person came down, they're going to be startled. They're either going to have a heart attack or they're going to freak out. Having one person to handle all that, getting them dressed, if you will, or just taking them out of their pajamas, it's very unwieldy. Now, again, this person is elderly. Are you going to knock them out or are you going to bind them and take them? I think this job is more than a one-person job. And when in earlier shows, when we looked at that video, to me, it just feels like this person was given directions, like a blueprint. This is what I need you to look at. Get acclimated. I don't think the person on the video is the main and only person.
I happen to agree with him, and we've said that from early on in this investigation. So as you could see, there was a lot of things that we discussed today, and there's a lot of still new meat and potatoes in this case that needs to be checked out. And as we said, every single day, they're coming up with new leads. They're coming up with new things to do. The investigative meetings they have, they're coming up with a direction. And let's hope the Pima County Sheriff's Office as well as the FBI are working together and not apart, because working together, they'll be much more powerful than working apart. Phil, I'm going to go to you first. Your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I agree with Stanton. I think it's more than one person involved. We talked about including and excluding. We don't do that just by opinion. Say, that's baloney. That's bullshit. No, we don't do that. We corroborate evidence. If a tip or something comes in, we look into it. We try to corroborate. Perhaps it's very, very important to the case. A lot of times it's not, and then we exclude it. Those are the things that we do as investigators. I'm glad we brought those points up, Billy, and we talked about a lot of the different things that we think are being done. Parolees are definitely being talked to and interviewed. People that had criminal past are also probably being talked to and spoken to. And with regard to these vehicles, very, very important, I think, in the case. $1.2 million. We talked about the reward from day one. $1.2 million along with a colorized video, and I think the phone's going to be ringing. Let's hope and pray for that. Keep these people, the Guthrie family, in your thoughts and prayers, and let's hope for a successful conclusion sooner rather than later.
Absolutely, 100%. I just want to mention one other person from the chat. At -6339, you guys are realists and not politicians. Thank you. No, thank you for that comment. That's very nice. Mike, your final thoughts.
I think that it was very interesting. The last two people, the guests that we saw, one said it's possible that she may be in that car. The other said it's probable. I side with Phil, and I think this person too It's probable. I don't really believe in coincidences. If that looks like, that white car that they already thought was involved, I think it's very significant. If that's headed out of town, that shows me that car came by that neighborhood. They got Nancy, and then they continued south. And as you said, the criminal wants to go where they are comfortable with. I want to know if there's anybody that's still listed as a possible suspect or a strong person of interest, whatever words, terms you want to use. Do they own property in that direction, 10 miles away, 15 miles away? Because they're going to a specific place. They're not just wandering around. If you've got someone in the car, you've got to go someplace. You just can't just go wander around the countryside. So I would like to see if they're working with a prosecutor's office to see if they can get some search warrants for anyone who's got property in that area south of where that car was headed. I'm very hopeful.
Very good thoughts, Mike. Folks, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. And just a quick reminder, the Police Off the Cuff podcast is sponsored by FanDuel on the Believe Network. So we're going to stay with this case. And as you could see, even though people are saying, oh, it's cold, it's wine. No, it's not. It's not cold. And it's not winding down. People are working hard every single day in an attempt, and not just an attempt, a real effort to try to solve this case. And we believe, we said this from day one, this case will be solved. We can't tell you when, but it absolutely will be solved. Folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff on behalf of myself, Professor Mike Guthrie, retired NYPD Detective Phil Grimaldi. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day, everyone, and God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.